I went camping by myself in the fall a couple years back, just before the weather turned cold enough to bring frost at night. I remember the timing because I'd taken a few days off after a long work project. I didn't want to travel anywhere crowded or noisy, and I wasn't looking for a social trip. I wanted to get away from people altogether. No hotels, no city sounds, no phone signal. I found a place that seemed right for it. It was a rough, primitive camping area in a state forest that didn't get much traffic. There were no designated spots, no rangers patrolling. You just walked in and set up where you wanted. The only real trail was a narrow footpath that cut through a couple miles of brush and forest until it opened up to a little pond surrounded by trees. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I packed light, just a two-man tent, a sleeping bag, some food and water, a folding knife, a flashlight, and a few layers of clothes. I brought a small book and my dog, Juno. She was a mutt, about 40 pounds, a little old but always eager to be outside. She'd been with me for years and never wandered far. She wasn't aggressive or protective, but she always stuck close. I hiked in the first afternoon and found a flat patch near the pond. There were no other tents, no footprints, no trash. I liked that. I didn't want to bump into anyone. I set up the tent facing the water, made a small fire ring with some rocks, and boiled a little instant coffee on my camp stove. The sun went down quick, like it always does in the fall. The colors dropped out of the trees and turned everything gray and dark within half an hour. That night, I was lying in my sleeping bag with Juno just outside the tent, under the flap. She didn't like sleeping inside the tent. Never had. She'd just curl up under the little vestibule and fall asleep right there, nose tucked under her tail. Every night, I'd reach my hand out to her through the half-zipped opening and let her lick my fingers. It was something she always did, kind of like a goodnight habit. She didn't bark at things or fuss. But when she licked my hand, it felt like a signal, like everything was normal, everything was fine. It was a weird routine, I'll admit, but it had been going on for years and I never thought twice about it. I woke up early the next morning to the sound of birds and the smell of damp pine. Juno was lying exactly where she'd been, awake but relaxed. I made oatmeal, refilled my water from the pond using a filter bottle, and hiked a short loop trail with her. Nothing unusual. It was cool, cloudy, but peaceful. We didn't see another person. That night went about the same. Dinner by the fire, quiet sky. Juno lay under the flap. I reached my hand out, and she licked my fingers once before settling in. I fell asleep fast. The third day is when things started to feel a little strange. Juno kept looking toward the tree line. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't growl or whine, but she'd lift her head and stare for long stretches of time, especially toward the backside of the pond. I figured she heard an animal or saw something I didn't. Deer, maybe. She was calm but alert. That evening, I walked around the pond alone while Juno slept near the fire. On the far side, across from where my tent was pitched, I found an old tree stump that had been burned out at the center. It looked like someone had made a fire there before, but not recently. There were some small bits of plastic melted into the dirt and a couple cigarette butts. Not fresh, probably from weeks or months ago. I looked around but didn't see any trash or tracks. When I got back to camp, the fire had gone low. Juno was sitting up, facing the trees again. I fed her, then sat with her a while before bed. I turned in around 10, zipped into the sleeping bag, and reached my hand out like usual. She licked my fingers once, like always. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. It was sometime in the night, maybe 2, maybe 3. I couldn't see anything through the tent walls, but I could hear water moving, soft splashes. Not far away. The pond was maybe 20 feet from where I was sleeping, but the water had been perfectly still all day. The splashing wasn't loud, but it was slow and steady, like someone was walking along the shallow edge. Not a fish, not a bird. I stayed frozen for a long time, listening. After maybe a minute or two, it stopped. Then I heard something else. Breathing, right outside the tent. It wasn't Juno. I knew what she sounded like when she slept. This was slower, heavier. I held my breath. The air felt thick. I reached out my hand through the flap. Slow, careful, like I'd done 100 times before. After a second, I felt it. A lick. Wet. Warm. I exhaled. But then the sound of breathing didn't stop. It was still there, right next to the tent. That's when something snapped in me, some instinct I didn't even know I had. I sat up fast, grabbed the flashlight, and flicked it on through the mesh window. Juno wasn't there. I unzipped the tent and scrambled out barefoot. There was no one under the flap. I called for her softly, then louder. Nothing. I walked a full circle around the campsite with the flashlight. No tracks, no sign of her, just trees and silence and cold air. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I packed everything up and started hiking back to the car, calling Juno's name every few minutes. About a mile from the trailhead, I found her. She was lying on the side of the trail, curled up in a ball, shivering. No blood, no visible injury, but her legs were muddy and her eyes were wide and glassy. I don't know where she'd gone or what happened, but she didn't respond to me the same way. She wouldn't make eye contact. She wouldn't walk on her own. I had to carry her the rest of the way to the car. I took her to the vet that same day. They said she was exhausted, dehydrated, and her heart rate was irregular. There were scratches on her paws, like she'd been running through rough brush, and her temperature was low. They kept her overnight. She recovered, but she never went near the woods again. Anytime we passed a tree line on a walk, she'd pull hard in the other direction. That might have been the end of it. But a week later, I checked my gear and found something. My tent had a small tear near the vestibule, maybe 6 inches long, right where Juno usually slept. The fabric was cut, not worn, like from a knife. And inside my backpack, buried under a pile of clothes, was a single item I didn't pack. It was a small dog collar. Not Juno's. It was old, faded blue with no tag, frayed at the edges, like it had been used for years. I don't know where it came from. I checked every pocket in the pack, every compartment. No one else had access to my gear. It wasn't there when I left for the trip. I didn't understand it then. I still don't completely. But the more I thought about it, the more things started to line up. That first night when I reached out my hand and got a lick, what if it wasn't Juno? What if she was already gone by then? What if someone had been watching me? Someone who had seen our routine. They would have had to be close, silent, careful, lying flat under the edge of the tent. And they would have had to know when to reach out, when to lick, and how to vanish before I checked. The collar, the slash in the tent, the breathing. It wasn't random. They didn't just show up that night. They had been watching, maybe from the first day, maybe from before I even set up camp. They'd seen how I slept, where I reached my hand, what I waited for. They saw Juno lick my fingers, and they mimicked it. And that message, the one that Old Story always used, humans can lick too. That's what haunted me, not because it was clever or creepy, but because it meant the person knew exactly what the lick meant. That's not something you do by chance. You have to understand what it means to someone, and then you use it against them. That's not just dangerous, that's intimate. They didn't just want to scare me, they wanted to be part of my routine. They wanted to slide into it quietly, unnoticed. They wanted to replace something personal and make it theirs. I never went camping again after that. Juno died a year later, old age, nothing sudden, but every time I reached down from the bed to check if she was there, I hesitated, because I remembered that night, and I knew the difference between her lick and the one that wasn't hers. I knew, and even now, years later, what gets under my skin the most isn't the question of who it was, or how they got that close. It's the question of how long they were watching before they acted. How many nights had they lain in the trees, studying me, learning my habits? How many chances did they have to do something worse? And why did they wait? What were they hoping for? What was the point of the collar? That's what I still think about, because someone had a reason, and I'll never know what it was. I went camping last fall, late in the season. It was cold enough at night that you didn't sweat, but not so cold you needed winter gear. I was alone, like I usually am when I go out. I know how that sounds. Most people I talk to about it always ask why I don't bring someone. The truth is, I just like the quiet. I like the space, the mental reset. I work a boring desk job, hours on a screen, and when I'm in the woods, all that disappears. This trip was one I planned for a while. I wanted to go somewhere different, somewhere less traveled, not a popular campground. I found a national forest out west, not far from the Idaho border. It was a good few hours from any real town, and the Forest Service maps showed a number of old fire roads and small trails that crossed through. I parked at a public access point, loaded up my pack, and hiked in about 10 miles the first day. The trail I followed didn't look like it got much use. There were no footprints, no signs of recent traffic, just narrow single track that dipped into valleys and crossed through thick stands of pine and aspen. I passed a few old logging markers, painted blazes on trees weathered and faded, and figured no one had done serious work out there in decades. The first night, I set up on a flat ridge that overlooked a small creek. I had my tarp, sleeping pad, small stove, the usual. It was a calm evening. Clear sky, light wind. I cooked some beans and rice, read a book until I needed my headlamp, then turned in. Nothing strange. I slept fine. The second day, I went deeper into the forest. The trees got thicker and the light changed. Everything looked a little more gray even during the day. The trail got hard to follow, and I started relying on my compass and map more. I wasn't worried, but I was paying attention. I'd done this kind of thing before. That night, I found a decent place to camp. It was an old clearing, probably man-made, with a bunch of fallen trees in a rough circle like someone had dropped them in place years ago. Moss had grown up over everything. It didn't feel unnatural, but it was odd, like the trees had been laid out on purpose. I set up near the edge under a large spruce. It was colder that night. I could see my breath by the time the sun dipped. I bundled up, boiled some soup, and sat on a log watching the light fade. The clearing filled with shadows, and the sounds of the woods settled into their rhythm. Distant owls, rustling in the brush, the wind moving through the branches above. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A branch snapping, close. It was sharp and quick, like someone had stepped on it. I froze in my bag and listened. I figured it was a deer or maybe even a bear. I stayed still and kept listening. Another snap, same distance, maybe a bit off to the right. It didn't sound like an animal moving randomly. It sounded slow, like something was placing its feet carefully. I reached for the knife I kept by my side and waited. No more sounds came. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up it was morning. Frost on the tarp. No prints, no sign of anything. I shook it off, told myself it was probably a deer and I just imagined the pattern. That day I explored a bit off-trail. There were no signs of anyone out there. No wrappers, no footprints, nothing. Just wilderness. I found an old stone chimney, still standing among the trees, with moss covering the base. Whatever structure it once belonged to was long gone. That afternoon, clouds rolled in. I made camp early near a rocky outcrop, just under a small rise where I'd have a bit of shelter from the wind. The ground was uneven, but I made it work. I built a small fire, ate early, and climbed into my bag as soon as it got dark. It was sometime past midnight when I woke again. Same thing, a sharp sound in the brush. It was closer this time, more deliberate. Not a branch breaking under weight, but something being moved, pushed aside. Then quiet, dead quiet. The kind of quiet where the usual background noise, the wind, the bugs, the creaks and rustles, all vanish. I sat up slowly in the bag, didn't turn on my light, just listened. Then I heard breathing, not my own, faint, steady, just past the edge of my camp. Not fast or loud, just slow, as if someone was trying to be quiet. I stayed frozen in place, knife in hand, heart pounding. The breathing stopped. For the next hour, I didn't hear anything. Eventually, I must have nodded off again out of exhaustion. When I woke up the next morning, I scanned the area, looking for any sign of prints or disturbances. Nothing. No tracks. No broken branches. No trash. No scat. I couldn't explain it. I thought about turning back, heading out the way I came, but I was 3 days in and not quite ready to give up. I figured I'd go one more day, make a big loop, then work my way back. That last day, I hiked about 8 miles through rougher terrain. Lots of deadfall, thick brush, loose rocks. Around late afternoon, I found a narrow gulch with some open flat ground beside a stream. Seemed like a good spot. I had a bit of view, the trees opened up above, and I could hear water trickling nearby. But something about the place felt off. Hard to describe, like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder while setting up camp. That night, I didn't start a fire. Just ate a cold meal from my food bag and stayed quiet. I didn't want to draw attention. I set my tarp low to the ground, almost like a bivvy, and zipped myself in. Took hours to fall asleep. Somewhere in the early morning hours, I heard the sound again. This time it was different. Not just movement, but a light scraping sound, like something dragging across bark. It was steady, rhythmic. Scrape, pause, scrape, then silence, then the breathing again. Closer now, right near my tarp. I didn't move. My heart was hammering. The breathing stayed for a long time. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't sniffing or growling. Just slow, calm. Then, footsteps. Not heavy, careful, moving away. I stayed awake until daylight, too scared to move or unzip my shelter. When the light finally came, I crawled out. That's when I found it. Just 10 feet away from my tarp, carved into the bark of a tree, were 3 long, deliberate marks. They weren't from an animal, not claw marks. They were too straight, too clean. They looked like someone had used a blade. A big one, maybe a machete. Each slash was about 3 feet long, side by side. Deliberate, marked. I looked around for tracks again. There were none. The forest floor was soft with needles and moss. Easy to walk without leaving signs. That was enough. I packed up as fast as I could and started hiking out. I didn't stop for breaks. I pushed hard all day. My legs ached, and my feet were blistered, but I kept going. I made it back to the trailhead just before sunset and drove until I hit the next town. I didn't sleep that night, even indoors. A few weeks later, back home, I started reading local forums and backwoods message boards. I didn't find much about that specific forest, but I did see a post from a guy who said he'd camped in that general area and had woken up to the sound of someone breathing outside his tent. He thought it was a bear until he found a small pile of broken branches laid in a pattern a few feet from his fire pit. No footprints, no other signs, just a warning, he figured. Another guy posted about hearing someone whistle in the woods every few hours, never answering when he called out. It went on for 2 nights, then stopped. No one ever reported being attacked or robbed or hurt. Just watched, listened to, marked. I haven't gone back since. And now, whenever I hear someone talk about camping or solitude in the woods, I don't tell them not to go. But I always say one thing: you're never as alone out there as you think you are. That's not the kind of thing you want to read or live through right before bed. I don't usually talk about this, and I don't like thinking about it too much, but sometimes the memory shows up when I'm driving at night or walking my dog past a thick patch of woods. Comes back like a picture I didn't ask to see. Me standing still in the middle of trees, knowing someone is nearby, and not being able to tell where or why. This happened back in 2019. I had just finished my last semester of school and didn't have any serious plans yet. I wasn't in a rush to get a job or move cities. I was a little burned out, honestly. All I wanted was quiet. For years, I'd been around people nonstop: roommates, classmates, professors, friends. I liked being social, but I needed space. Just a little bit of time where I could breathe without hearing voices or answering texts. I'd always been outdoorsy, so I figured I'd go camping for a few nights. Not at a big public campground with RVs and toilets, but somewhere more private. There was this place I'd gone to once with my uncle when I was younger. It wasn't too far, maybe 2 hours from my apartment, but it was deep enough in the woods that you wouldn't just stumble into it. No cell service, no paved roads, just a trail that led into state forest land, and if you kept walking a mile or 2 in, you could camp near a bend in a creek where no one ever seemed to go. I packed light: tent, sleeping bag, food, flashlight, a little solar charger, and one of those cheap battery-powered fans for the tent. I told one person where I was going and when I'd be back, mostly because it seemed like the responsible thing to do. I left early in the morning, parked near the gate where the trail started, and hiked in. Everything looked the same as I remembered it. Quiet trail, lots of shade, soft dirt underfoot. The creek still had water in it, which surprised me a little since it had been dry that summer. I found the same little flat patch of ground where we had camped before, clear of roots, close enough to the water for washing but far enough not to flood if it rained. I set up the tent, took off my boots, and just lay down for a while with the flap open, watching trees shift in the wind. The first night was normal. I made a small fire, ate some food, read a few pages of a paperback, then crawled into the tent when it got dark. It was quiet, no weird noises, no animals creeping around, just the usual hum of bugs and the soft rustling of wind through the trees. I slept straight through and woke up feeling rested. The second day I hiked around a bit. There was a ridge about a mile off that gave a nice view of the woods stretching out in every direction. I sat up there for an hour or two, eating jerky and drinking water, just looking out. It felt like I was completely alone out there. No planes overhead, no distant car sounds, no voices, just quiet. But when I got back to camp, I noticed something I didn't like. My backpack was zipped differently. It wasn't wide open or thrown around or anything dramatic, but the front pocket was zipped shut in a way I never do. I always leave it halfway open because I keep snacks and a knife in there, and I don't like having to unzip it fully with one hand. But now it was closed all the way, like someone had tried to make it look untouched. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I zipped it shut and didn't remember. Maybe it slid shut while I was carrying it. But something about it didn't feel right. The position of the zipper was just off, not where my hand would have left it. I didn't see any signs of animals. Nothing was chewed, and there weren't any prints or drag marks around the tent. I told myself it was nothing. I left the pack next to my sleeping bag and walked down to the creek to splash my face. That night, I slept with the knife under my pillow. I didn't sleep as well. I kept waking up, thinking I heard something outside the tent. Leaves crunching, a soft snap like a twig breaking. But every time I sat up and listened, it went quiet. I started to think I was being paranoid. The woods can mess with your head if you're alone for too long. The next morning, I made coffee and walked the perimeter of the campsite. I found one footprint. Not mine, not recent, but just deep enough in the soft dirt near the edge of the clearing to make me stop. It was small, not a boot print, maybe a trail runner or sneaker. Could have been mine from the day before, but the shape looked different. More narrow. I pressed my own shoe next to it. Mine was wider and the tread didn't match. That's when I started thinking about the idea that someone else might be out there. I hadn't seen another person since I parked. No cars, no bikes, no campers. Just me. But the woods are big, and if someone really wanted to stay hidden, they could. I left the camp that afternoon and walked toward the trailhead. I wasn't leaving yet, but I wanted to see if anyone else had come in. I figured if someone else had parked near the gate, at least I'd know I wasn't totally alone. When I got there was no other car, but on the passenger side of my windshield, under the wiper, was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a note or anything. It was a photo of me. I was sitting on the ridge, legs stretched out, the creek and trees behind me. I hadn't seen anyone take it. I hadn't heard anyone nearby. It was taken from behind, but I could tell it was me by the clothes, the way my backpack sat next to me, the way my arms rested on my knees. The photo was printed on regular copy paper, not glossy, and it had been folded down the middle. No writing, just that image. I stared at it for a long time. My stomach felt tight. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't a threat, not in words, but it felt like one. It was proof that someone had been watching me, close enough to take a picture, close enough to follow me back to the car and leave it there. I walked back to camp fast, packed everything, and started hiking out. I didn't care that I had planned to stay another night. I didn't care that the weather was still good. I needed to get out of there, but about halfway back, I stopped cold. On a tree, nailed into the bark about chest height, was another piece of paper. Same kind of paper, same fold, same picture. This time, it had been stabbed into the wood with a small blade. Looked like a penknife. The blade was left there, halfway buried in the tree. I didn't touch it. I turned around, walked straight back to the car, and left. I didn't report it. I didn't call anyone. I don't know why. I think I felt like it wouldn't matter. There was no crime, not technically. No injury, no theft, no property damage. Just a photo, just a presence. But that wasn't the end of it. A week later, back at my apartment, I started noticing small changes. My door wasn't fully shut when I came home one day, just barely open, like it hadn't latched. My window screen had a new tear near the corner. My bedroom blinds were tilted differently. I kept trying to tell myself I was imagining it, but the feeling was real. I felt watched. Not constantly, not in a dramatic way, but like someone was studying me. I installed a camera in my living room, just one of those cheap ones you can check on your phone. I didn't want to live scared, but I also didn't want to be stupid. And one night, around 3 a.m., it pinged me for motion. The video showed someone in a hoodie walking past my window. They didn't stop, didn't look in. They just walked by, slow and quiet. But the thing that made my blood run cold was this. When I zoomed in, I saw what they were holding. A folded piece of paper. I moved 2 days later. I changed my number. I stopped going outdoors alone. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted. But sometimes I think about that first moment at camp when I saw my bag zipped differently. That was the first sign, the first crack in the routine. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to scare me right away. They were studying, watching, learning my habits, stalking. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe they weren't planning to hurt me. Maybe the point was to make me feel watched, to know I wasn't alone, to take something ordinary and turn it upside down. I'll never know, but what keeps me up some nights is this. If they could follow me into the woods, get that close without a sound, leave photos without being seen, what else could they have done, if they wanted to? What stopped them? And more importantly, were they ever really gone? Because every now and then, I still catch my blinds tilted the wrong way. I'm not going to pretend that I was brave about it. I wasn't. What happened during that solo camping trip stuck with me longer than it should have, even after I moved cities and tried to act like it was just a bad memory. I think the thing that made it worse was how small it all seemed on the surface. Nothing happened in a dramatic way, nothing loud or violent. It was just little things, real things, that piled up until I couldn't ignore them anymore. It was late August. The summer was winding down, and I was trying to fit in one last trip before the weather turned. I didn't have a lot going on that week. I'd taken some time off work, had no plans, and just wanted to be out in the trees again. I liked the quiet. No phones, no people, just the sounds of the forest. I always camped alone, not for some macho reason or anything. I just liked the peace of it. I picked a spot I'd been to once before a few years earlier. It was down a gravel service road off the main highway, then about a 45-minute hike into the woods. No marked campground, just a small clearing with enough room for a tent and a fire ring someone had made with stones. It was tucked between a few hills, and a small stream ran nearby. No cell signal, which was fine with me. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, food, water, flashlight, fire-starting kit, a book, and a fixed-blade knife I always carried just in case. The first day was uneventful. I got to the site around noon, set up, and spent the afternoon walking a few trails nearby. I didn't see anyone. No other tents, no other hikers, not even a boot print. That night, I made a small fire, ate some cold food, and watched the last of the light disappear behind the trees. I turned in early. The tent was just big enough for me to stretch out in. I left the flap open a bit to let in air, and I could see stars through the mesh. I had a habit, I know it's kind of weird, but I'd stick my hand out the side of the sleeping bag when I was falling asleep. I liked the cool air on my skin. Sometimes I'd reach out and rest my hand against the tent wall or just leave it near the edge. I'd done it for years. Sometime in the night, I woke up. Just briefly. I didn't sit up or check the time. I just remember feeling something warm and wet slide across the back of my hand. Like a lick. I flinched, pulled my hand back into the bag, and sat up fast. My flashlight was right next to me, so I clicked it on. The beam swept across the tent. Nothing. The flap was still zipped shut. I unzipped it and shined the light outside. No sound, no movement, nothing. Just woods and dark. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, or maybe I drooled on my hand or something, but it hadn't felt like that. It had been deliberate. One single lick right across my knuckles. I stayed awake for a while after that, flashlight in hand, ears straining for every sound. Eventually I fell asleep again, but it was restless. The next morning I got up early and walked the area around my tent. I looked for tracks or signs of animals. There were a few small indentations that could have been anything.
No claw marks, no prints.
I started to doubt myself again. Maybe it really was just a dream, but that day felt off. I kept thinking I saw movement in the trees, just a flash of color or a shadow shifting. Every time I turned my head, there was nothing there. I didn't feel alone anymore. I didn't hear voices or anything like that, but I couldn't shake the sense that someone was nearby, watching. I didn't hike that day. I stayed near camp, kept the fire going longer than usual, and made sure everything was packed up tightly. That night, I locked the tent flap shut and kept my hand inside the bag. I didn't sleep much. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I heard something outside, a slow dragging sound, like something moving across dirt and leaves. Not an animal trotting or digging, something heavier. I held my breath, waited, then I heard a soft crunch. Something stepped on a stick, not far away, maybe 15 feet from the tent. I didn't move. I just lay there, holding the knife under my pillow, staring at the ceiling of the tent. No sounds after that, just silence. I eventually drifted off again, probably out of exhaustion more than anything. The next morning, I found something that made my skin crawl. Just outside the tent, on the side where I usually stuck my hand out, someone had left a piece of duct tape stuck to the outside wall. It was about 5 inches long, not holding anything down, just there. I didn't carry duct tape. I didn't bring anything that used it, and I hadn't seen it the day before. I packed everything up in under 10 minutes. I didn't eat, didn't check the trails. I just stuffed everything into my pack and started hiking back to the car. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder. At the car, there was something else. Under the driver's side mirror, tucked behind the glass, was another strip of duct tape. Clean, not dirty or weathered. Folded in half lengthwise like someone had been playing with it. Like someone had taken it off a roll, folded it once, then stuck it there for me to find. I drove straight home. I kept checking the rearview mirror every few minutes. The whole way I felt like someone was following me. I don't mean in a car. I mean out there, somewhere in the trees. When I got home, I threw the tent and sleeping bag into storage. I didn't unpack anything right away. I didn't want to touch any of it. A few days later, I finally looked through my gear. Nothing missing, nothing broken. But inside the bag I'd used to carry food, I found something I definitely didn't pack. Another strip of duct tape, folded just like the others. No note, no writing, just that. That's when it really hit me. Someone had been there, not just near the camp, inside it. Close enough to put something in my gear. Close enough to know where I slept, where I kept things. Close enough to lick my hand while I was half asleep. There was no humans can lick too nonsense. No message left on the mirror or scrawled on a wall. Just the action itself. That's what made it worse. It wasn't about shocking me or being clever. It was quiet, personal, real. I didn't report anything. What would I say? That someone left tape near my tent? That I felt something lick my hand? There was no proof, no crime, just fear. I never went back to that spot. I haven't camped alone since, because whoever it was didn't want to hurt me. If they did, they could have. They were close enough. They had chances. They didn't want to scare me either, not in the usual way. They didn't make noise, didn't trash my gear, didn't leave threats. They just wanted me to know they were there, that they'd watched, that they'd touched me, and that they were smart enough not to get caught. That's what really stuck with me, not the lick. The fact that they didn't need to say anything at all. The sun was already low in the sky when I finally parked my car at the small trailhead. The forest around me was thick, a mix of tall pines and oaks. their branches whispering softly in the evening breeze. I'd been itching to get away for a few days. Just me and my gear, no distractions. The campsite was supposed to be a quiet spot, miles from any road or town. Perfect. I grabbed my pack and started down the narrow dirt trail, the fading light filtering through the leaves. The path was rough but well used, and the smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air. It was peaceful, and I felt that familiar calm I get when I'm in the woods alone. My plan was simple: hike in a couple of miles, set up camp, build a fire, cook some food, and just enjoy the silence. About halfway to the campsite, something caught my eye just off the trail near a cluster of bushes. At first, I thought it was a pile of rocks, but as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't stones at all. It was a small cairn. Stacked bones, maybe a dozen or so, neatly balanced on top of each other. Some looked like small animal bones, maybe a rabbit or a bird, but there were a few bigger ones mixed in, maybe from a deer or something larger. The bones looked old, bleached by the sun and rain, but they were arranged in a way that suggested someone had put them there deliberately. I stopped and looked at it for a moment, my skin prickling. I've been camping long enough to know when something's off, but I also knew better than to mess with things like this. Maybe it was some kind of marker or a warning left by another hiker. Whatever it was, I didn't want to touch it or move it. I took a mental note to be careful and left the bones where they were. The rest of the hike went smoothly. I reached the clearing where the campsite was just as the last light slipped behind the trees. I picked a flat spot, cleared some leaves, and set up my tent. The ground was firm but soft enough to hammer stakes in easily. I stacked some firewood nearby, made a quick dinner of canned beans heated over the fire, and settled in for the night. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of small animals and the distant hoot of an owl. I felt good, tired but content. After cleaning up, I zipped my tent closed and crawled inside. I left my headlamp just inside the door and pulled the sleeping bag tight around me. Sleep came quickly, though not deep. I kept waking up now and then, senses alert in the strange quiet of the woods. When morning came, I unzipped the tent and blinked at the bright sunlight filtering through the trees. That's when I saw it. Bones. Not just a small pile or cairn like the day before, but a perfect circle of bones arranged right around my tent. They weren't stacked this time. They lay flat on the ground, spaced evenly, forming a ring maybe 6 feet across. I didn't recognize all the bones this time. There were more of them, bigger pieces, some looking like long leg bones or ribs. I stared at the circle for a long moment, feeling a cold pit grow in my stomach. My first thought was that maybe someone had done this as a prank. But who would come out here just to arrange bones around a stranger's tent? And why? The whole thing didn't make sense, but I wasn't about to get closer to figure it out. I grabbed my pack and stepped out of the circle, trying not to disturb anything. Then I noticed more bones, scattered in a line, stretching away from the tent and leading back toward the trail I'd come in on. They weren't random. They looked carefully placed, like a path made of breadcrumbs, guiding me somewhere. My heart beat faster. I followed the bone trail, walking carefully between the trees. The farther I went, the more bones appeared, stacked loosely here and there, sometimes in small piles, sometimes just lying on the ground. The path wound through the forest, sometimes close to the dirt trail, sometimes cutting through thicker brush. I kept thinking, what if I'm being led away? What if this is some kind of trap? I didn't want to turn back to my tent. I didn't want to be inside that circle of bones. But the trail of bones was the only clear path visible now. The sun was rising higher, and I realized I had to get out of there soon. The forest felt different, darker, heavier. As I followed the bone path, I kept my eyes peeled for anything unusual, tracks, signs of other people, anything that might explain what was going on. But I saw nothing except the bones and the trees. After maybe a mile, the path of bones ended abruptly at a small clearing. In the center was an old tree stump, covered in moss and dirt. Around it, the ground looked disturbed, as if something had been dug up or buried there recently. I knelt down and looked closer, brushing away leaves and dirt. I found more bones buried just beneath the surface, broken and incomplete. That's when I realized how serious this was. This wasn't some prank or an odd tradition. This was a warning, a a sign. Something bad had happened here, and the bones were left as a marker. Maybe for people like me who wander too far, who don't pay attention. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the woods around me. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, watching. I decided to head back to my car, ignoring the bone trail. I backtracked through the trees, choosing my own path, trying to avoid where I'd seen the bones laid out. The woods seemed endless, but I focused on the sounds. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the calls of distant birds, anything to guide me. It took longer than I expected, but I eventually reached the dirt trail. From there, it was a steady walk back to the parking lot, the sun now fully risen and warming my back. When I got back to the car, I paused and looked back at the trailhead. The forest looked just as calm as before, but I knew better now. There was something dark here, something I didn't want to mess with. I packed up quickly and drove away without looking back. That night, safe at home, I kept thinking about the bones. Who had put them there? What had happened in those woods? I didn't have answers, and part of me hoped I never would. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that circle of bones, perfectly arranged around my tent. And I remember how close I was to being trapped in that silent, cold place forever. It was just after sunset when I got back to my campsite. I had spent the afternoon hiking along a narrow ridge and then found a small stream where I stopped to wash off the sweat and dirt from the day's trek. The cool water was refreshing, running over my hands and face, washing away the sticky grime. The forest around me was quiet, the sun filtering through the thick canopy in slanting golden beams. Birds had mostly settled down for the evening, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze was the only sound besides the trickling stream. I followed the path back, my boots crunching softly on the dry leaves and twigs scattered on the ground. The light was fading fast now, and the shadows were growing longer. I was eager to get back to my tent, set up my stove, and prepare some food before it got too dark. The thought of sitting by a small fire, feeling the warmth and eating a hot meal after a long day of hiking was a comfort I looked forward to every trip. When I finally reached what I thought was my camp, I stopped. The tent was there, exactly where I had left it. The shape was familiar, the same small dome style I always used. Everything looked exactly the same at first glance. My backpack leaned against a tree nearby, and there was a small clearing where I had arranged my gear. But then, as I moved closer, I noticed things were off. The zipper on the tent was on the opposite side from what I remembered. I always set up my tent with the door facing east, towards the rising sun. This tent had the door facing west. I could see the tent's outline clearly in the fading light, and the door flap was definitely switched around. I crouched down to look at the stove sitting just outside the tent, on the small patch of bare dirt where I had cleared a spot for cooking. The stove looked almost the same as mine, compact, lightweight, designed for backpackers, but the logo was different. It was a different brand altogether. I know my stove well. I had chosen it carefully for its reliability and lightweight design. This one was a similar model, but not mine. I stood up, my heart beginning to beat faster. Something didn't feel right, but everything seemed perfectly in place. I looked around the clearing, trying to find anything else that might confirm this was not my camp. My backpack was there, but when I grabbed the strap to lift it, the feel was slightly different. The weight wasn't right, the fabric texture not quite the same. I glanced inside it quickly, clothes and gear arranged in the exact order I always kept. But the smell was strange, not quite the same as my usual scent of earth and sweat. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked back at the tent and then towards the trail that led to the stream where I had washed up earlier. I hadn't taken my eyes off this place for long, but now I was starting to doubt everything. I took a step back and scanned the forest around me. The tall pines and firs stood quietly, their needles rustling softly in the breeze. No footprints or signs of other people anywhere near. No voices, just the distant call of a crow and the soft whisper of the wind through the branches. Suddenly, from deeper in the woods, I saw a figure approaching. The person was carrying a large, rolled-up bundle over their shoulder. As they drew nearer, my heart slammed in my chest. It was my tent. The exact tent I had set up earlier that morning, with the zipper on the right side, the logo on the stove matching perfectly the one I owned. The bundle was unmistakable, the fabric, the poles, everything. The figure walked past the tent I had been standing in front of without looking my way, moving calmly through the clearing. They didn't seem to notice me or care that I was standing there. I just stood frozen, watching. The tent I thought was mine was not mine. Somehow, someone else had set up a nearly identical camp in the exact spot, but with small differences that I hadn't noticed at first. I realized the campsite I had returned to was someone else's, a perfect copy of my own, but subtly wrong in every detail. The tent, the stove, the backpack, all nearly identical but not quite right. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me. I didn't hear any voices calling out. The woods were silent except for the faint sounds of the evening. I moved slowly away from the camp. The figure with my tent had disappeared into the trees beyond the clearing. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. How had this happened? Who was this person? And how had they copied my gear so precisely? I started walking back toward the stream, the place I had washed up earlier, trying to keep my breath steady and not panic. My hands trembled as I gripped my actual backpack. I thought about the walk back I'd made just moments ago and realized I couldn't have mistaken the trail or the campsite. This was exactly where I had camped. When I reached the stream again, I sat down on a rock and stared into the water. The sky had darkened now, and the stars were starting to peek through the trees. I felt exposed, vulnerable in the middle of the forest with someone else so close, someone who had been almost shadowing me. I had to think clearly. I decided to pack up my real tent, stove, and gear quickly and find a new place to set up camp for the night. I didn't want to stay where someone else had been watching or copying me. That thought alone made my skin crawl. The forest was alive with nighttime sounds now. Crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, distant calls of nocturnal birds. I packed up carefully, trying not to make too much noise. I could feel eyes on me, though I couldn't see anyone. Once my gear was packed, I moved quietly but swiftly down the trail, deeper into the woods. I wanted to put as much distance as I could between me and that strange campsite. My mind was buzzing with questions, but I pushed them aside. It was more important to get safe and set up a new camp. After about 20 minutes, I found a small clearing with a flat patch of ground, sheltered by tall trees. It was far enough off the trail to avoid anyone passing by, but close enough that I wouldn't get lost. I set up my real tent carefully, double-checking the zipper, the poles, and the stakes. I laid out my gear and stove, watching the shadows dance between the trees as the moonlight filtered down. I sat back against a tree and lit a small fire in my portable stove. The smell of burning fuel filled the air, and the warmth was a small comfort in the chilly night. I ate my dinner quietly, eyes scanning the dark forest around me. I kept my pack close, my flashlight within reach, and my phone in airplane mode but fully charged just in case. I didn't sleep much that night. Every rustle and snap in the woods made me jump. I kept thinking about that other campsite, the person carrying my tent through the trees. Whoever they were, they knew I was here. They had copied me so closely it was like a shadow of my own camp. When dawn finally came, I packed up quickly and left without looking back. I decided to cut my trip short and head back to civilization. The woods were no longer a place of peace for me that day. I don't know who that person was or what they wanted, but after that night, I never camped alone in that area again. I started taking different routes, avoiding trails I had been on before, and always checking over my shoulder. That experience stayed with me for a long time. It made me realize how easy it is to feel safe in the wilderness, and how quickly that feeling can be taken away by something as simple as a misplaced zipper or a different stove brand. It was a quiet kind of fear, but it was very real. And it reminded me that sometimes the scariest things aren't monsters or ghosts, they're just other people. People who watch, who copy, who are always just a few steps behind. We went camping deep in a pine forest that stretched for miles in every direction. The kind of place where GPS signals fade and you don't hear cars or people, just wind through trees and the occasional snapping twig. There were 5 of us, me, Mark, Devin, Caleb, and Josh. We were all in our mid-20s, had grown up together in the same town, and this was our annual trip. We wanted something more remote this year. Mark found the spot online through a guy he met on a hiking forum. It wasn't on any official map, just a drop pin and a vague description. Old logging road, follow for 9 miles, then hike another mile west. We packed light, enough food for a week, brought 2 tents, sleeping bags, headlamps, a couple knives, bear spray, and even a rifle just in case. We weren't stupid, we knew how isolated we were going. The first day was normal. We set up camp near a dry creek bed, a nice flat clearing surrounded by tall pine trees with mossy trunks and needle-covered forest floor. No cell service, no noise, just the sound of wind in the trees and the occasional bird. It was beautiful, quiet, peaceful even. We built a fire, sat around it drinking and eating dehydrated chili, talking about work and girls and stupid stuff. We stayed up late and went to sleep without thinking twice about anything. But the second night, something changed. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. because I had to piss. I stepped out of the tent, walked a few feet into the trees, and that's when I heard its soft, high-pitched laughter. A child's laugh, coming from far off in the woods. It was faint, just loud enough to be sure it wasn't the wind. No movement, no crackling branches, just that same little giggle like a 6-year-old laughing at a cartoon. My heart thudded in my chest. I stood there listening. It didn't come closer. It didn't repeat. Just once and then silence. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Or maybe it was some kind of animal. Foxes make weird sounds. I've heard that. I didn't wake anyone. I went back into the tent, laid down, and listened until I eventually drifted back to sleep. The next night, I wasn't the only one who heard it. We were sitting around the fire again, maybe around midnight. It was colder, and the wind kept shifting directions. At around 2 a.m., everything went still. The fire crackled, but even the trees seemed to stop swaying. And then it came again, laughter, faint, from the same direction, deep in the woods to the east. Mark stopped mid-sentence. Caleb sat up straighter. We all heard it this time. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Same tone, same pitch, a little girl's laugh. Nobody said anything at first. We just stared into the darkness past the tree-line. Finally, Devin said it was probably a coyote or something. Mark said maybe there were campers nearby, maybe a family. But I knew better. We hadn't seen a single sign of anyone else. No trash, no fire pits, no footprints, no distant firelight, just us and the forest. We kept hearing it every night at the exact same time. Always around 2 a.m., always the same direction, same distance. Never any closer. The laugh never changed. Not louder, not more frequent. No running or talking, just the same short giggle. Like a recording on loop. On the 5th night, Josh went missing. We'd all been drinking, not enough to be out of control, but enough to loosen up. He went to bed first, said he was tired and had a headache. We stayed by the fire another hour or so before packing it in. I remember zipping up the tent and thinking I hadn't heard the laugh yet. I checked my watch, 1:56 a.m. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up at 6:30 to Mark yelling. Josh's sleeping bag was empty. His boots were still by the tent entrance. His flashlight was gone. So was his coat. His bag was untouched. No sign of a struggle. Just gone. We called for him. We fanned out, searched in every direction. No tracks. No broken branches. No note. Nothing. We spent all day looking. Mark and Devin hiked toward the eastern woods, yelling his name every couple of minutes. I went south toward the dry creek bed. Caleb went west, toward the way we came in. We regrouped at camp that afternoon. No one found anything. That night, nobody wanted to go to sleep. We sat around the fire in total silence, all 4 of us staring into the trees, waiting. 2:08 a.m., it came again. But this time it was different. We heard the laugh, same tone, same pitch, but followed by another, slightly deeper voice. Another laugh. And that second laugh, it was Josh. His voice. No question. It was his stupid, wheezing laugh. I've known the guy since we were 10. I knew it was him. We just sat there frozen. I felt the blood drain out of my face. Devin stood up and walked to the edge of the clearing, squinting into the woods like he could make out shapes. He didn't say anything. He didn't move past the tree line, just stood there with his fists clenched, like he wanted to scream. That next morning, we didn't even talk about what to do. We just started packing up. We left extra food and a note in case Josh came back. But none of us believed he would. Took us the whole day to hike out. By the time we reached the logging road, the sun was setting. We were exhausted, dirty, confused, and scared. Back home, we reported it. The ranger station didn't even know the spot we camped at. It wasn't on their maps. Search and rescue was called in. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers. Nothing. Not a single clue. They said Josh probably got lost and disoriented, maybe wandered too far, maybe fell. That laugh we all heard? They dismissed it as coincidence or our imagination. But it wasn't our imagination. We all heard it. A month passed. Then two. No sign of him. No calls, no body, no credit card use, no phone signal, nothing. I couldn't stop thinking about that laugh. I kept hearing it in my head. Same time every night, around 2 a.m., I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could still hear it faintly outside my window, even though I was back in town, surrounded by houses and streetlights. I started recording every night just in case, but never caught anything. We tried to move on. But none of us really did. Mark stopped replying to texts after a while. Caleb moved to another state. Devin still messages me sometimes, usually at weird hours, just "Are you awake?" Or, "Do you remember what it sounded like?" I tried going back once about 6 months later. I wanted answers. I wanted closure. I didn't tell anyone. Just drove out, parked, and hiked the old route back in. But when I got to the spot, I couldn't go through with it. I stood on the edge of the clearing and stared at where the tents used to be. The forest was too quiet, oppressively still. I didn't even stay the night. I turned around and hiked back out before it got dark. I've told this story a dozen times now, but no one really believes it. They think it was a wild animal, or maybe Josh just ran off, lost his mind, faked his own disappearance. But we heard him. We heard that laugh. Every night, exactly the same. And the night after he vanished, it included his voice. His exact laugh, mixed into that same rhythm, like it had been added to a loop. I think about what could explain it. I've done the research. Sound can travel in weird ways in the forest. Echoes can do strange things. Animals can mimic sounds. People have gone missing for less. But that doesn't explain the pattern, the timing, the fact that it never got closer. It doesn't explain how it was identical every single night. It doesn't explain why the laugh changed only after Josh disappeared, or why it sounded exactly like him. There's no lesson here, no big reveal, no monster behind the curtain, just an empty forest, a missing friend, and something we still can't explain. The world is big, and there are places out there that don't want to be found. Places that hold onto people, that mimic them, maybe even replace them in some way we don't understand. I don't know what we heard. I don't know what took Josh, but I know it wasn't an accident. It wasn't wildlife, and it sure as hell wasn't our imagination. I haven't been camping since. I had been planning the trip for a while. Work had been killing me, and I needed something to reset my head. I didn't want a crowded campground. Didn't want people playing music all night or kids screaming around my tent. I wanted quiet, real quiet, the kind that feels like you're on another planet. So I dug into maps, satellite images, Forest Service websites. Eventually, I found a spot deep inside National Forest land, about 20 miles of rough dirt roads past the last paved highway. No cell service, no rangers on regular patrol. The closest official site was miles back, and that one only had 2 other people on the registry for the weekend, both nowhere near where I planned to go. I packed everything I needed to stay out there for 4 days. Tent, stove, food, bear canister, water jugs, extra batteries, satellite GPS in case things went sideways. I had a printed map with compass bearings marked out and the old paper kind of Forest Service map that folds 12 ways and never sits flat. I left a copy of my route with my brother and told him I'd check in Monday. I got to the trailhead a little after noon on Friday. I had to crawl my truck up a winding gravel road that had weeds growing up the middle and a couple tight switchbacks where the trees had almost reclaimed the edges. I dropped into low gear for most of it, just inching forward while branches scraped the sides and the suspension groaned. I saw no one, no tire tracks, no signs of recent traffic. It had rained 2 days earlier, and the road still showed the puddle scars from that. I parked in a tiny pull-off that could maybe fit 2 cars if they were both compact. Just beyond it, the road narrowed even more and eventually disappeared into brush. I hiked about a mile down from there to a clearing I'd picked out on the topo map. A flat patch not far from a small creek, surrounded by pine and aspen. It was perfect. I set up my tent with the door facing the trees and started boiling water for dinner. The air was crisp, maybe low 50s by sundown. No wind. No animal sounds except for the occasional crack of branches from squirrels or birds hopping around overhead. That first night, I slept well. Sometimes I don't the first night out, but this time the stillness helped. There's something calming about being that far from civilization. No buzzing power lines, no headlights, no cars in the distance. Just dark and quiet and cold. I woke once around 2 a.m., probably because I drank too much water before bed. I stepped out to take a piss, looked up at the stars, brighter than I'd seen in a long time, and crawled back in. Slept until almost 8. Saturday was uneventful. I wandered the woods nearby, found some old logging debris maybe half a mile uphill, sawed stumps and rusted cables wrapped around a downed tree. Could have been 40 years old. I saw deer tracks, scat, a couple rabbit holes. No sign of predators, no bear prints, no cat tracks. The ground here was a mix of hard dirt and old pine needles. Good for hiking, not too much brush. I cooked some oatmeal, read for a while in the hammock I strung between 2 trees, and took a nap in the afternoon sun. That night, I built a small fire and sat near it until the sky turned black. No planes, no satellites, just stars and the shifting shadows of trees. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 10 and drifted off fast. At 3:13 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why at first. There was no sound, no animal outside, no wind. Just my heart pounding like it knew something I didn't. I lay still for a minute. I could feel the cold now. It had dropped hard during the night, and I was zipped into my bag tight, only my nose out in the open. My ears started to pick up something faint. It was the crunch of gravel. At first, I thought I imagined it, but it came again. A slow, deliberate sound, like tires rolling over loose rock. Not close, but not far either. I turned onto my side and stared at the nylon wall of my tent, trying to pinpoint the direction. The road I had hiked in on was behind me and uphill. The sound was coming from there. The crunching grew louder, then stopped, then started again a bit closer. It wasn't fast like someone driving through. It was slow, like someone easing forward, maybe riding the brake, not wanting to make noise. I sat up slowly, careful not to make a sound. My sleeping bag was loud, nylon always is, and it made a subtle swish as I moved. I reached for my headlamp but didn't turn it on. I didn't want any light giving away my position. The walls of the tent glowed faintly with starlight. The sound continued, off and on, maybe for 5 minutes. Then silence. I waited. I didn't breathe deep, didn't move. Nothing. No doors, no voices, no engines revving. No footsteps in the brush. Just nothing. Eventually, I laid back down, but I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling of the tent go from black to gray as dawn came. I waited until I could see clearly without a flashlight before I stepped outside. The forest looked normal. Cold air, wet grass. My fire pit was undisturbed. But I walked uphill to the gravel road, heart pounding again. There were fresh tire tracks. I stared at them for a while. They came down from the way I'd driven in, turned at the little pull-off, and then stopped. Then they backed out, same set of prints, exact same tread pattern. No boot prints, no oil drips, no broken branches, just fresh tracks, still sharply edged in the gravel, not yet scuffed by wind or water. I followed them for a bit, maybe a quarter mile. No signs of a turnoff or parked vehicle. They came down, turned in, paused, and backed out. Nothing else. And they weren't there the day before. I would have seen them. I know because I had to park and pull around slowly to avoid a big rock that was still pushed to the side. Someone came through here at 3 in the morning, eased into my pull-off, sat there, then left. I didn't know what to do. I looked around, listening hard for any movement, but there was no one. I couldn't hear a thing except some birds starting up in the trees. I went back to camp slowly, checking the trail and brush around me, trying to see if someone had gone off-road on foot. Nothing. The pine needles were undisturbed. No broken twigs, no crushed moss. Back at camp, I made coffee. My hands were shaking. It wasn't the cold. I debated packing up and leaving, but part of me felt that might be overreacting. Maybe it was someone lost, turning around. Maybe a hunter checking access. But what kind of hunter creeps up a forest road at 3 a.m. with their headlights off? There hadn't been a moon out. It was pitch black. I tried to get through Sunday like normal. Took a short walk. Didn't wander far. I kept scanning the tree line, looking for anything out of place. I stopped using my earbuds when I walked and left the fire burning longer than usual that night, just for the comfort of the light. I slept with my knife next to me and my bear spray clipped inside the tent. Didn't use earplugs like I normally do. Nothing happened that night, but I didn't sleep much either. Monday morning, I packed up fast. I didn't eat breakfast, just stuffed everything in the pack and hiked uphill to the truck. I stopped short when I saw the cab. There was a smudge on the passenger side window. It looked like a handprint, not full, not clear, but it was there, just a greasy streak where the light caught it. I'd wiped the inside of those windows clean before the trip. I always do because I hate how fast they fog up. I unlocked the door and checked inside. Nothing taken, nothing moved, but I still felt sick. I turned the key and backed out, watching the mirrors. I didn't drive slow on the way down. I pushed harder than I should have. The suspension groaned. The truck scraped once or twice, but I didn't care. I just wanted off that mountain. I didn't stop until I hit the first small town with a gas station and working cell signal. I checked my phone. No messages. I texted my brother to let him know I was safe and sat in the lot for a while. Engine off, door locked, just watching the pumps and the few cars that came through. I've done a lot of solo camping. That's how I clear my head. I've had close calls with weather, with animals, even with people once or twice. But this one shook me more than any of them. Not because something happened, but because nothing did. And I'll never know what would have happened if I'd gone outside at 3 a.m., if I'd left my headlights on, if I'd camped 50 yards further down the trail and hadn't heard a thing. I still camp, still go out alone, but I don't go as far anymore, and I always park facing out. I had taken a few days off work to get away from everything. City noise, emails, the constant buzz of things. I needed silence, the kind that presses into your ears until all you can hear is your own heartbeat. So I picked a canyon in the high desert, miles from the nearest road. No signal, no other campers, just rock, sand, and sky. I parked my truck off a dirt road and hiked in 5 miles with my gear. The canyon was narrow at first, but opened up into a wide, flat basin surrounded by red rock walls. One side had a low cliff that formed a sort of natural amphitheater. There was a sandy clearing near the base of the cliff that looked perfect for my tent. Flat, sheltered from wind, with decent cover from the sun during the hottest part of the day. I set up camp just before sunset. I had my tent facing the cliff wall, with a fire pit set a few yards away. The stars came out in layers. I sat by the fire eating canned chili and sipping water from my Nalgene. Coyotes called out in the distance. Their yips bounced around the rock, echoing strangely. But it was peaceful. Dry air, cool night, absolute silence between the gusts of wind. The first night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard this soft tapping sound. Not loud, not close, just there. Came in short bursts, 3 or 4 knocks in a row, then nothing for a while. I figured it was the rocks cooling down. I'd read somewhere that sandstone expands and contracts when temperatures change, and the desert drops fast at night. So I listened to it for a while and fell asleep with no problem. The second night, it was the same. The knocks came and went, like a rhythm I couldn't follow. Sometimes it sounded like it was across the canyon. Other times, it felt like it was closer, I didn't get up to check. I didn't want to lose the warmth I'd built up in my sleeping bag. I told myself it was natural. Maybe rocks settling, maybe some animal movement stirring up loose stones. On the third night, I sat in the tent with my headlamp on, writing in my journal before bed. I heard the tapping again. This time it was to my left. I turned off the lamp and waited. The sound came again. For knocks, maybe 20 feet away. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moon was half full, throwing shadows all over the canyon. I couldn't see anything moving. I thought I saw a rabbit dart through the brush, but it might have been nothing. I zipped it shut and laid back down. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the same tapping. Only now it was on the rock wall right next to my tent. Not the usual distant stuff. This was close, sharp, and deliberate. For knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. I sat up. My chest was tight, like I'd been holding my breath even before I woke up. I told myself again, thermal expansion. Maybe something fell from the cliff. Pebble. Maybe a lizard kicked some stones down. I didn't open the flap that time. I laid back down, eyes wide, and waited. The sound didn't come again. Morning came like a relief. Blue sky, warm sun, nothing weird in sight. I made coffee, ate oatmeal, and decided to hike a few miles further into the canyon to clear my head. The air felt clean out there, dry and crisp, the kind of quiet that makes you think too much. I came across some old petroglyphs on a boulder and spent time sketching them in my journal. Time passed fast. By the time I got back to camp, the sun was already dipping low. That night, I didn't even try to fall asleep right away. I sat outside the tent, fire crackling low, listening. No tapping for a while. No wind. Felt like the whole canyon was waiting for something. I stayed up until the fire burned down to coals and the cold crept in too deep. When I got in the tent, I left the flap unzipped just a few inches, just enough to see out. I laid there with my bag zipped to my chin, headlamp off. I stared at the crack in the flap, watching for movement. Hours passed. I drifted in and out of light sleep, and then tap, tap, tap. This time, it wasn't on the rocks. It was on the tent. I froze. The sound was slow, spaced out. 3 taps, then silence. I felt it in my chest, like it echoed inside me. Then again, 3 knocks right behind my head. The fabric shook slightly, like fingers dragging down it. I turned my head slowly and looked through the crack. Nothing, just the pale blue light of moon on rock and sand. I waited. No more sounds. I reached out, hand shaking, and unzipped the flap. The air was cold and still. The fire pit was dark. I stepped out, barefoot, holding the little flashlight from my sleeping bag. I swung it slowly around the tent. That's when I saw it. A single handprint, smeared on the side of the tent, just above where my head had been. Fingers spread, palm wide. The print was red, not blood red, but clay. Thick and gritty, like someone had dipped their hand in wet desert mud and pressed it slowly against the fabric. I stared at it, flashlight trembling in my grip. I crouched down, looked closer. It was fresh, still damp at the edges. I looked around. The sand near the tent was disturbed, little scuff marks, but no clear footprints. It was too dry, too packed. I walked the perimeter of the camp slowly, sweeping the flashlight in wide arcs. Every bush looked like a crouched shape. Every shadow stretched too long. But I saw no one. No tracks. No sign of movement. Nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat inside the tent with the light off, holding the little hatchet I kept next to my gear. I kept the flap slightly open and watched the canyon. Hours dragged past. Nothing happened. To first light, I packed up. I rolled everything as fast as I could, hands stiff from the cold. I kept checking over my shoulder. It was like something was hiding just outside the edges of my sight, waiting for me to relax. I started hiking back to the truck by mid-morning. The sun came out early, burning the chill off quick, but it didn't help. The feeling stayed with me, like I was being watched the whole way out, like something had followed me for miles. I didn't stop to eat, didn't take water breaks, just walked, fast and hard, until I saw the top of my truck peeking over the scrub brush. I got in, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't feel safe until I was back on paved road, with traffic passing me in both directions. When I got home, I unpacked everything. I laid out the tent in the garage to air it out. The handprint was still there, dry now, cracked and pale, but still visible. I told myself it was probably a hiker who stumbled across my camp. Maybe they were high, maybe just curious. Maybe they saw the fire and wanted to see who was out there. Maybe it was just a prank. Someone messing with the only other soul they found in that whole stretch of land. But the thing that stuck with me, the thing I still can't explain, is how quiet it all was. Whoever it was didn't make a sound. No footsteps, no brush rustling, just those soft, steady knocks, like they'd been watching me for days, learning the rhythm of the canyon, like they wanted me to hear it. I've gone camping since then, but never in that kind of isolation. I stick to state parks now, places with people nearby, where I can see the glow of other campfires at night, where help is just a short walk away if I need it. I still have that tent. The handprint faded eventually. I could wash it out if I wanted to, but I haven't. I keep it as a reminder, not of danger exactly, but of how thin the veil really is, between being alone and not, between silence and something inside it.